welcome to another Wargame review from theplayersaid.com. My name's Alexander.
And I'm Grant.
And today we're taking a look at MBT from GMT. And this game is... So MBT stands for Main Battle Tank. And this is it's combined arms, but we did just tanks as armored warfare in the kind of theoretical what-if World War III scenario of a shooting war breaking out in the middle of the Cold War. And so we've got NATO forces and we've got the Russian forces.
It says the game of tank-to-tank combat in 1987 Germany.
And this is, so if anyone's read any of the kind of Harold Coyle military books, he wrote a few books about this. I think one of them was called like The 10,000 or something like that, maybe was one of them. He wrote a bunch of books, and I read those as a kid, and they were really, really cool and interesting, and he did the writing was really well done. So the theme of this appealed to me. The artwork's really cool. There's a lot of tanks flaming on fire, and that's definitely what happened in the game that we just played.
Lots of blown
up
tanks.
Like every tank died. But it was
every Russian tank. Every Russian tank.
And this is my first kind of armored. That's not true. It's one of my first armored tactical games.
Well, old school tactical.
Old school tactical does that as well. So yeah, I guess.
But we haven't played many.
Not many.
Many armored. Mostly we played small arms, just soldiers. So
Yeah, and
like Combat Commander.
Right, or 65. We played a ton of those things, but this one, it's like based off of it's the same game engine as the Panzer series, which is basically a World War II version of this type of game, using similar type of movement and command rules and things like that. A game that I've not played that, but I've heard great things about it.
People love it.
Yeah, this one was touted as being ludicrously detailed in the types of weapons that are used in modern day warfare, and the types of ammunition and subtypes of units. There's so many units in this game, and each unit, this is just one tank, and it has an ungodly amount of detail on it.
Lots of information.
Like 4 or 5 different rounds it can use. They have different ranges and armor-piercing values because of that. Tons of different armor values down here. And then these are double-sided, different tank on the back. And there's
there's a stack of them this size.
There's this many of those, of all tanks. I mean, there's helicopters, there's armored vehicles, I think there's A-10 Warthogs in here as well. There's just so much to explore, and that's one of the things that enticed me to the game, is just that I wanted to experience that level of detail. And what we did was we played the basic game just to kind of introduce ourselves to the system, which actually has very little of that in it. The basic game you can use your different rounds in your main tank, but the armor values are very much, it's front and back, and it's just a single armor value, and the shots pierce your armor at like a set rate. So if I shoot at X range, my pierce value is printed on this card. If it's more than your armor value at that given range, a certain thing happens. So we didn't get to experience any of the kind of the reactive armor or any of these tons of different. There's so much in this game, and most of it is in the advanced game and optional rules, which we didn't get to experience. So that's something that I personally will play around with on my own to just try and feel what that is like. But this is a game that lends itself to hours and hours of investment if this is the kind of thing that you're into.
Yeah. I think if you really like a lot of detail, the advanced game is probably the way to go. I will say this, while this is our first play, very first impressions, we played for about an hour and a half, I think, maybe 2 hours.
Yeah.
I think the basic mechanics are tactical. You're trying to move, you're trying to position, but there are a couple things about it that I was just more disappointed with in regards to a tactical setting. One was terrain and or cover. I don't know that it really ever made much of a difference, and maybe it doesn't. Never sat in a tank. I'm more used to Combat Commander, where the difference of a -2 from a thick wood is a big, big difference. Here, it was only a couple percentage. I think we talked about it was 8 to 10 percentage in a mischance, which really wasn't that significant enough to really worry about trying to hole up. And that was something that I think got me. We also, because I'm aggressive, it's just who I am, I kind of moved in with all my tanks immediately. So Alexander did in kind, and we kind of dispensed with long range fire and just kind of slugged it out.
And maybe that's where a lot of the game lies, is kind of positioning halfway across the map and like taking pot shots at each other and utilizing, range bands and stuff. But we got right into it, into the deep, dark, and dirty to try and take the objectives in the middle of the board.
Yeah.
So almost all the combat was done within, 10 hexes, if not a lot less than that. So every shot would hit, and every shot would blow a tank up.
We're gonna take a break.
So, the combat that we experienced in this game was very, very lethal. Every single hit took a tank out of action. Yeah. And I suppose, not knowing as much about current modern history, military history, I don't know if that's how that should happen or what that would look like. But our board is littered with the BU counters, which are just like flaming hulks, and we had there's 3 tanks left on the board, and the game started with almost 30. So part of me thinks, that's how it should be, because there's a difference between shooting a small arms fire into a woods versus shooting a 105mm cannon into the woods.
It kind of
125mm.
It kind of takes the woods out,
right? So there's an element of that, but it just meant that the positioning was so important, and your field of fire. Mm-hmm. So a lot of the game was in driving around and trying to outposition each other, because as soon as you get the cannons on each other, it's over. And the initiative, and I've read a lot of comments about the game saying the initiative was too important, and I would agree with that statement to a large extent. For how important the initiative is, if you need to shoot first because you've got people in your field of fire and they've got their guns on you, like whoever goes first is going to have the opportunity to knock the other person out.
And because this game is when you take a hit and you're blown up, you're done.
Yeah.
So you placed your command, that unit will not get to act.
Yeah. Well, they'll be dead. And the initiative's it's a die roll.
Yeah,
right?
It's a die roll.
So I wish, and there might be some way to house rule that if the initiative changes or some way to do that, but having it a percentile roll, it was a little bit just like, okay.
Well, and it's one of those things, if you win the percentile roll, you get to choose.
Yeah.
So you can choose to go first, and that means you're going to fire first, but you're going to move second.
And I enjoyed that. So it makes it super powerful, but that's almost too powerful.
Right.
Right.
But then the other is if you don't go first, you're going to fire second and move first.
Which puts you at a disadvantage in both of those phases.
I agree.
That's how important this is, and for it to just be a die roll, it was like, there were turns where it was like, the initiative happened, and you were like, okay, well, we know how this turn's going to go.
Right.
But it was just like, hit, kill, and then, 2 tanks move over here. You could almost predict what was going to happen because the combat was so deadly.
Well, and even the very last round, I think we made it to round 12. I won the initiative. I had 1 tank to your 3. You had 2 tanks that I think were at, was it medium range?
They were at medium range, and they were shooting through the BU, the brew up smoke. So they were
it's like a 40% chance of hitting, I think.
Yeah.
So I thought to myself, maybe I'll let you go first so I can see what you're going to do, and then I'll move. I died.
Right.
So I think it got me. I probably should have moved first, gotten out of the way. But yeah, that initiative I think is very, very significant.
Yeah, I'd like to see a way to have that worked out. And I know there's rules to do with how well trained your force is, and that gives you a modifier on that in the advanced rules. But that's like a preset value with what's printed, and there's a ton of cohesion rules that I believe affect that as well. There's just so much, but I think this game at least warrants it's going to take me like hours to study that advanced rules and to get to the nitty gritty with that.
Well, and I don't want to give up on this game after just one play. We do love tactical games. I do not want to give up on it after one play, but I think there were just some things. I think I came in with a different opinion of what it was going to be.
Yeah.
Now, let's change gears really quickly because I think we've kind of been on the negative side. I really enjoyed the placement of the commands at the beginning. So you're blindly placing your commands and choosing what you're going to do, not knowing what the battlefield's going to bring. And I think that's, so if you really want to do something, you got to place it, and then you got to win initiative to do exactly what you want to do. Like fire at a unit that's right in front of you. And I kind of liked that. I liked having to make that choice. And a couple times I kind of asked myself, well, if I lose this initiative, Grant, you're going to be firing and Alexander's going to be moved out of your arc. So that kind of changed what I decided. A couple of times I used the fire move, right? The shoot and scoot, where I would fire and then you got to move half your movement.
Yeah.
Just because I was like, well, if I lose my fire, at least I have the opportunity to move a little bit and
like
reposition myself. So I did that a couple of times. So I really liked that element. That to me is Fog of War, very tactical and very realistic.
Well, and it's Fog of War not only for the other player who doesn't know what you're going to do, but it's almost Fog of War for yourself.
It
if
is.
you lose that initiative, you're like, oh no.
Everything I was going to plan is done. In fact, there was a couple times I had fires over there. You had moved, and it's like, nope, can't do anything.
Yeah, and that's, I enjoyed that because that simulated to me the chaos of battle.
Yes.
And there are a lot of games out there that attempt to simulate that, and they're like, oh, the die rolls help you simulate that. To me, placing your commands and then doing the initiative, that takes that aspect to a whole nother level where you're like,
yeah, because imagine if we rolled initiative first.
well, yeah.
Then you got to place your commands. Totally different.
Yeah.
Totally different.
And I don't think that would be as enjoyable.
I don't think it would.
The tension of putting them out, and you're like, okay, here's to the dice gods.
So that is something that I liked. I enjoyed that part of it. And I remember our first round when I was putting those on, I was like, I have no idea what I'm doing. But then by the 12th round, I was like, yeah, I know exactly what I should, and tried. We used Overwatch a couple of times. I don't know that it ever really worked for us.
No.
But
I knew or had an idea that you were putting a guy in Overwatch, so I avoided going over there.
Yep, absolutely.
So that in turn does what it's supposed to do.
Yeah, the one time you moved a guy down and I missed.
You either use it as a deterrent or it's that opportunity fire, which is awesome too.
So I really liked that aspect of the game. I also like the maps. These are great maps. They're just like Combat Commander. Seems to be the same scale.
Yeah.
They do have some new terrain, like this heavy rock or whatever it was called. But beautiful maps. And the counters are great. These little cards were really cool to kind of look at and kind of understand, hey, this tank's good at X.
Yeah.
And I like that. You had a bunch of Abrams tanks, and you were definitely good at certain things, and I was good at others. So
what we'll do is we'll have a quick look at the board on some of these pieces, and then we'll come back for some final thoughts. So here's a look at most of the map. Couldn't fit it all in the shot here. So these BU counters that are littered across, those are flaming hulks of the dead tanks. As we finished our game, so there's one tank here, and then there's two tanks here. That's all the tanks that were left on the board. Everything else was dead.
Here, I'll pan up and see that pile of dead tanks over there. That's the Russian tanks.
These are the Russians.
Lots of dead tanks.
And we got these are the U.S. dead ones here as well. I had a lot of destruction going on. So the map itself is fairly decently sized. You got these geomorphic maps, and the Panzer maps that you get in those games are fully compatible. It's exactly the same terrains and designs. So you can expand this game or add these to those games. That has some cross-compatibility there. The components, like we said, are fantastic. You got these huge... These are tank counters. These are the Russian T-72s.
Beautiful counters.
And then on the back of them, you've got T-72Bs. So every counter's double-sided. There's so much in the game. And we only played this first scenario, so Grant had just this type of tank. So only had one of these reference cards. And then I had this one here. So what you have is you've got your different ammo types, and then you've got range bands, which from point blank, short, medium, long, and extreme. And you'll use these in the basic game. You've got some movement values up here, as well as some other different sizes. As a track value of tells you what type of movement it can use. And then you have this armor value of, well, we'll be using this one here. This armor value of 48 and 16 down here as well. So you're referencing this card a lot. This tells you kind of what your tanks can do. So your tanks on the board really they just have their movement factor on them. That's the only thing they have. This has 5 movement if it's using its kind of off-road movement, 7 if it's using these little brown paths, and then 11 if it uses only the grey roads. Everything else is on this card, and then you'll cross-reference what might be one of the busiest player aid charts of all time.
Lots of info.
And this is just the combat side. This has all of the different terrain effects and the spotting stuff. There's just, and we didn't even use half the stuff. Like there's just so much stuff on here, which is for the advanced game only, which you don't even see that here. So as you can tell, just looking at the numbers, this game is unbelievably detailed. Now, from a design standpoint, I can't imagine the level of research that went into all of the odds calculations for the different guns, the different ranges of each gun, the different types of ammo that each gun fires. Just so much has gone into that.
Can you imagine having to balance that stack of different types of tanks?
Yeah.
To make sure one's not overpowered, or that would just be, that would require a lot of work.
There's just so many of these,
Yeah.
and then there's all the air rules on top of
Yeah.
that. There's just an amazing amount to explore here. But really, the crux of it is you've got all these different command counters. You've got fire commands, move commands. You've got these short halt move and fires. You can put them in Overwatch, or if you really were so inclined, you can issue a no command.
Which actually, I think, does have a use in the game. We just didn't necessarily use them.
I think what I'd like to see is however many no command things you issue, that might give you a bonus to your initiative roll.
Yeah.
That might be an interesting little thing to play around with.
So that would denote that you were kind of preparing.
Yeah.
Rather than doing something, you were kind of preparing.
You're committing all your forces
Yeah.
to get one guy to do a thing, and he can do it right off the bat, and then everyone else is stationary. That might be something. But
there's some gamesmanship in using those no command tokens.
Yeah.
Because if you don't know it's an Overwatch or a no command, you're going to change your movement, like you said.
Yes.
Or your actions.
And basically, everyone places these face down, so no one knows what's been placed. And then you roll your initiative, and everything's done with percentiles. So I roll the 91, Grant rolled the 54. I get to choose who has the initiative, while I choose myself to go.
But you wouldn't always.
No.
It just depends on what's happening.
But I'm going to do that in this case. So I get to do all of my fire actions first, and then, after having resolved all of those, say I'll blow up Grant's tank, woo, then Grant gets to...
That happened a lot.
Grant gets to do all of his fire attacks. Well, this is a fire short halt move, so what happens is he gets to shoot. He has a negative because he's doing this action, because he's kind of moving and shooting is what it represents. You know, oh, he blows me up. Probably that's what's going to happen at this range. Then what happens is you go to the move phase. I went first in the fire phase. I go last in the movement phase. So Grant has to then, use his movement, or 1, 2, 3 kind of thing. He moves. And then I had the initiative, so any other tanks I had move actions on, I would then move those. So having the initiative is really that important, where you get to shoot first, and then you get to position afterwards, which going last for movement is almost always more important or better.
Yeah, I agree.
I think about games like X-Wing Miniatures game, where the higher value pilots, they shoot first, I think. Yeah, they move last and shoot first, which is the opposite of this, but it has the same effect.
Right.
So you can line up all of the other guys, kill them, and you get to position yourself in the best possible way.
And another thing that is important in this game is facing. So when you move into a hex, you face along the straight line of a hex. You don't ever face like this at a corner. So it really matters where you are, and you really got to pay attention to that, because your fire arc spreads out from there, and you're not going to be able to hit units that are not in that fire arc.
And we came into that. If you're positioned here, this tank can't shoot this one, and this one can just blow them up right from the side. And that provides that's where a lot of the tactics come in.
Yes.
The ranges on the guns are just ludicrous. I mean, like half of them, if you use your extreme range, you're shooting
across the whole
20
map.
plus hexes if you really wanted to. But so a lot of the game is flanking and moving around large hills and terrains, using trees to block, and then just popping around and opening fire, catching the enemy off guard. I think that's very difficult to do, but I think that's where a lot of the game lies. And then, again, I feel like the basic game wasn't actually all that hard to learn. But I've read through the rules, had to read through them again, because they're a little bit complex and detailed. But if you play many tactical war games, a lot of it is not unfamiliar, at least. But I know that the advanced rules are like 4 times the size of the basic rules.
Yeah, it looks scary.
So
to be honest.
I'll be slowly taking my way through those. But that's really a lot of what the game is. You calculate the range between, and then that gives you a range band. So let's see. You have these range bands. Oh, I'm 12 hexes away. I roll my dice. My dice gave me a 63, which you would consult on your AP hit table. Oh, if I was at medium range, I needed a 50% or less to hit. While I rolled over that, it was a miss. If I hit under that, then great. So if I'd rolled like a 16, for example, I'm less than 50. I hit, fantastic. Then you go to the actual like hit modifiers. That guy was pathetic, so we'll go back. So this guy shot at medium range. He does 86 of his armor piercing, and that's a flat value for the base game. If he's shooting an Abrams here, his armor value is at 48, because the 86 exceeds the 48 by 10 or more. He gets the BU counter. Look, he's completely dead. It's all over for him. It's just a flaming Hulk, and that's what happened a lot in this base game, right? Every tank, almost without exception.
I think I had one tank that you KO'd me.
Yeah, and that was because I did a hit,
long range.
a very long range, and then another one, and then it KO'd
me.
And then I damaged one of the tank, but everything else was just brewed up.
And the other cool thing about this is these BU markers, that actually, if you have to fire through them to hit a target, you actually incurred a -2 penalty.
Yeah.
You just basically 2 column shifts. So that was also kind of tactical and trying to figure out how to get my units in between that for protection, but it also hurts you on the offensive as well.
And that's really where a lot of the game is. You have all these modifiers and these accumulative, and it moves you up and down the AP hit chart. So normally you start in the gray section, you got to fire through the brewed up smoke, which is a -2. So instead of hitting on a 70%, it's only a 56% or less.
What conditions added positive shifts?
There's not a lot of them.
I don't know that we
but
ever
it's things
encountered
like
that.
having a NATO target acquisition bonus.
Yeah, that must
things
be an
like
advanced
that.
rule or
Yeah, and
something.
there's some other bits and pieces, but
Okay.
I don't think there's very many of them. Frankly, a lot of it's negatives.
Right.
I think getting higher results is much more difficult. Maybe if you're shooting down, but I'm not sure about that. But yeah, that's really a lot of what the game is. So what we'll do is we'll wrap up with some final thoughts here. So now let's look at the board and kind of some of how the game works. Like you can see, just there's a huge mess on the table because we were just playing with all the components. Speaking of which, there is so much in this box, like an unbelievable amount.
This is a 2-inch box,
And
right?
when you open it new, it is chock full. So when you've punched all the counters and organized everything, there's no conceivable way to fit all of that in this box. So I currently
Have a brown shoebox, basically.
yeah, I bought this from Target, and this is it's a 3-inch box, and even with everything in it, this is almost full. And I know that there's 2 expansions coming out for this game. There's British Army on the Rhine, and then the West Germans, the Bundeswehr. And heaven knows where those are going to go, right? So just be aware that you're going to have to find some kind of storage solution for this game.
Right.
But that being said, the more the merrier in this kind of game. If you want to explore this kind of stuff, and this appeals to you, this kind of period of time of like, what if, there was the shooting war in 1987, there is so much in this box. There's so much to play around with and to learn and just to experience. So that.
And we did one scenario.
Yeah.
We played one scenario out of probably, how many are in there?
Oh,
30, 40?
It's a lot. The
lot.
playbook is very big.
So I would think that there are other scenarios that have other offerings or other benefits or even things you have to worry about. So this was an introductory. I think we got an understanding of how the game is played, got an understanding of the rules.
Yeah.
and a flavor for it. It's lethal.
Right.
We've been talking about this. It's lethal. You're not
Yes.
going to get winged in this game. More often than not, you're burning, and you got to understand that. So you got to make sure when you move and you move into firing range of your enemy, you expect to take some losses.
Yes, heavy losses.
Heavy
and,
losses.
And there are anti-tank units that are like men with rocket launchers and those kind of
Panzerfaust
things. Yeah,
and-
all that kind of stuff. There's air units. I mean, there's an unbelievable amount that we didn't even touch.
Cover, yeah.
Not even scratch the surface of this
I'd
game.
love to see that A-10 Warthog flying around. That
Yeah,
would be really
and
cool.
there's 2 air phases, so you've got this guy's blowing through, killing
Yeah,
stuff, and then
that'd
you've got
be-
your Apache coming in later.
That'd
to
be
take
pretty cool.
And I think about that, and I'm like, game's gonna be just as lethal.
Yeah, it's going to be even more so.
I don't know if this is one of those games where you're like, oh, I break a unit, they're gonna retreat a bit, which is
Yeah.
how I feel like some of those World War II tactical games are
Yeah.
like.
Yep.
This is you're either alive or you're dead. And
Well, yeah,
there's
Combat
very,
Commander-
very little in between.
Yeah, Combat Commander, you're going to get winged and you're going to break a unit. You're going to have a card where you can rally them, and this doesn't happen. In fact, I asked that during the game. Is there a way I can rally these guys?
How do I repair my
No,
tank with a
yeah,
hole in the front?
I know, and I said that
No.
kind of facetiously. But interesting game. I just think I'm going to need more plays to really make a
Yeah.
solid judgment on it.
Yeah, I'm gonna spend hours pouring through this rule book, and just there is sometimes a little bit of eye strain looking at all the different numbers.
They're small.
But the actual gameplay, when you were doing it, moving, shooting, is actually fairly simple. Like that's not difficult, but the rules are very, very detailed in this one. So that was a quick look at MBT, Main Battle Tank from GMT Games. And we've been the Player's Aid.
Thank you.